Hello, and welcome to Temple Beth-El's Member Spotlight. Today we're talking with Larry Gutterman. Hi,
Hi,
Larry.
hi, Beth. How are you?
We've never actually met in person, I don't believe.
I don't believe.
How long have you been a member at Temple Beth-El?
Personally, about 15 years, but uh, I'm a third generation member. Both sides of
Wow,
the family. All my grandparents were members. My parents were actually married in Temple, as was my brother. Um,
that's
yeah,
great.
we have a long history, both sides of my family.
How many rabbis do you think have come and gone in that time?
Well, I remember Rabbi Sam Berman and Cantor Abe Berman. Those were the clergy of my youth. And we really have not had, uh, in terms of full-time permanent rabbis since then. We've had Ken Brickman,
Yeah.
Debbie Haken, and now Leanna Morit. I mean, there were some interims. There was Rabbi Beal
Yeah.
uh, between Rabbis Haken and Morit, but in terms of full-time rabbis, it's been since Sam Berman, only three.
Were you bar mitzvahed at Temple Beth-El?
No, we lived in Bayonne growing up, and I was bar mitzvah at Temple Beth-El.
Hmm.
And but I've always attended services growing up. We'd spend one day at Beth for the holidays, and then we'd go to Jersey City for the second day, or vice versa.
That's great. So you grew
Oh,
up in Hudson County?
I did. Born in Jersey City, raised in Bayonne and in Jersey City. My grandparents all lived within 3 blocks of Temple.
Oh, that's a great family history. Have you personally lived in other places other than New Jersey?
Too numerous to name in this bit of time that we have, I'm sure. But yes, I have lived in many. I went to college in New Orleans. I lived in California for a little bit of a time, and now I currently reside in Vermont. Although I'm back and forth to Hudson County, but New Jersey in general, a couple of times, at least a couple of times a month.
Yeah, I think Rabbi Moore told me that you lived in Israel for a little while.
No, I
No?
have I have family with whom I'm close living in Israel, and I would dearly love to go see them, but unfortunately they are not first degree relatives, and as such, I cannot get permission to enter the country at this point. I currently have two tickets with El Al warehoused for a future date.
Wow. Oh, we got a little crisscrossed on that one.
Well, that's all right. I would live there if I could.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite place that you lived? Is it
Yes,
Vermont?
where I have been now full time for almost 10 years and on and off for 30, here in Bondville, Vermont, which is about an hour and 15 minutes or so to the north and east of Albany, New York.
Oh. So
So
so when you say you go back and forth, do you drive?
yeah, yeah, it's a very easy 3.5 hour ride to the Welcome to New Jersey sign in Mawa.
That's great. So um I know that you're a funeral director.
Correct.
And for those that don't know, can you tell them the name of your company?
Name of my company is Gutterman Brothers, and I am a fourth generation funeral director. My great grandfather, Abraham Gutterman, well, he was Abraham Gutman when he entered this country in the 1880s. How he became Gutterman is a mystery, but he worked for a stable at 49 Orchard Street in Lower Manhattan. He
Yeah.
was a stable hand, and in the early 1890s, he bought the stable and continued their business of supplying undertaking services to the local Jewish community, which is what people in the stablery business or cabinet making business, furniture making business, that was an extension of their trades because they would supply, in my grandfather's case, the horses and carriages. In the case of a cabinet maker, those were the people who built coffins.
That's so interesting.
And so my great grandfather became a Gutterman undertaker, It then became A. Gutterman and Sons Undertakers. They were primarily in Lower Manhattan, moved to East Broadway, and then out to Brooklyn. And then in the 1930s, my grandfather, one of his two sons, was sent to Jersey City to establish a presence there. And we opened in 1931 in the Five Corners neighborhood.
Right. That's not
And
too far
then
from me.
just after World War II, they purchased a house on Kennedy Boulevard and Union Street, just a few blocks south of Temple. And they turned it into a living quarters upstairs and a funeral home downstairs. My father and uncle actually grew up in the funeral home. And from there were, as many people know, large corporations come in and buy up funeral homes. Well, the long and the short of it is I am an independent family-owned funeral home, as are my cousins on Long Island, who the name is Guttermans. There are other iterations of the family name located in New Jersey that have no association with my family and that are owned and operated by one of the aforementioned large corporations. So it's one of the things that I do on an almost daily basis is give people that little bit of information that if you want a family-owned funeral home owned by the Guttermans in New Jersey, I'm the one to call.
Is there what would be the positives in a family owned versus a big corporation owned?
Very simply put, when my phone rings, I answer it.
Right.
When the phone rings in a conglomerate-owned funeral home, you're going to get somebody who may have been there for a period of years or a period of days.
Mm.
They're not likely to be Jewish because there are very few Jews in this business in funeral service that don't own their funeral home. So the big conglomerates, although they own funeral homes with Jewish names that they have acquired, and my family's not the only one, you're not likely to get anybody in the family whose name is on the building, nor are you likely to encounter a Jewish funeral director. And everything is done, as you might expect, by the numbers. There's no, I'm trying to think of the word. There's no improvisation. It's strictly.
Right. It's
Yes.
not a personal service.
Not a personal service. Whereas
Right.
when you call me, you get me. And frankly, I attend and conduct virtually all of the funerals that I handle, unless I happen to be in Israel. I'm more than likely going to be there, whether it's taking place in New Jersey, anywhere throughout the metropolitan area. Uh, people have cemetery grounds in many parts. People are familiar with Long Island and Queens, and we service every Jewish cemetery in the metropolitan area.
Oh, that's wonderful. You're basically on call
I'm on call
24/7?
24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Right now, my phone is on silence,
Yeah.
and my business line is forwarded to the answering service.
So when we finish this, you'll be checking in.
I'm looking at I'm constantly looking over to my phone to see if anybody needs me, because it quite often happens in the middle of a social event, in the middle of a synagogue service, in the middle of anything I might be doing, dinner with friends, and it's the way it was growing up. I watched my father have to cancel plans of one kind or another to be with the family, to speak with the family.
Wow. That's dedication for you. I am curious, like day to day, you deal with people that are in probably the worst part of what happens in life and grieving for someone that they lost. How do you I mean, as someone that's working and seeing these people every day, how do you stay centered? Is it just so
I
because you've done it for
I
so
find it,
long?
I'm sorry?
Is it just because you've done it for so long?
I've been around it all my life, and that probably has a great deal to do with it. But it's also a matter of, first of all, I love what I do, and I have I possess the understanding that I have a job to do, and my job is to get you from the initial phone call through, in most cases, burial. And I have to, because I stay focused on what my job is, I don't have a chance. I mean, honestly, it's not the person for whom the funeral is being conducted is not my relative. It's not my
Right.
mother, not my father. I have a job to do, and that is to get you, as I said, through the burial with as much dignity as I can possibly provide you. Um, and there have been times in the case of a tragic death of a younger person. Yeah, it's you have sometimes you have to take a step back and say, "Wow, this is a tough one."
Yeah.
But always keeping in mind though that this is my job, and I have to do it, and I do it as best I can. Uh, I've had losses in my family. When my father died, I switched roles from that of funeral director to son.
Yeah.
It was a little there were some days, a couple of days he died in Florida, and I had to perform both. I had to do both jobs. I was a son attending my father's death, and I was also the funeral director arranging his transportation and back to New York,
Oh,
back to New
wow.
Jersey, and his burial. So it wasn't until afterwards that I actually got to do my personal grieving. But
Yeah.
I'm not without feeling. But again, it's typically it's not my family member.
Right, right. Well, no, thank you for sharing that with us. Wow. So at our last board meeting, Rabbi Moore mentioned that you're the head of our Temple Beth-El Cemetery Committee. Can you talk a little about what the committee oversees?
Sure. I am a committee of one. I don't believe I have any other committee members. Uh, we have Temple owns grounds in two cemeteries which are active. We have a few graves in Mount Lebanon Cemetery in Island, New Jersey. We also have three tracts of land at Mount Moriah Cemetery in Fairview, New Jersey. One is the quote unquote old grounds, which is where burials took place from, say, the 30s up through the early 60s. It's where Rabbi Thorner, Maurice Thorner, who was the rabbi before Sam Berman, is
Oh,
buried. We also have a newer grounds, which uh, were mostly active, still a little bit active from the late 60s through the 90s. Not too many burials take place there. And we also most recently acquired a block of 90 graves in a great location, actually adjacent to the original grounds. A beautiful spot in Mount Moriah, which is a beautiful cemetery. Uh, it's probably one of the best maintained, best run cemeteries in the New York metropolitan area, and for that, we are very fortunate in that our grounds are located there. On a daily basis, I field calls from other funeral directors who have burials to conduct on one of our pieces of grounds, and I issue permits and collect a burial permit fee for Temple. I speak to families who call a cemetery asking about a grave for a parent that they already own. They want some information, and the cemetery will usually direct them to me
okay.
because we control our grounds. And I also get involved with the sale of the of graves to individuals.
Oh, well, that's really interesting. Um, I know it's supposed to be a mitzvah if you take care of your own burial arrangements. Is that something that you've,
Are you talking, if you're asking me, is it a mitzvah to make plans in advance?
yes.
I'm not going to say that it's one of the 613 mitzvot in the Torah, but I will tell you that it will make everybody's life a lot easier if you do some things in advance. One of the first questions I'm going to ask anybody when they call me, whether it's in a pre-need situation or unfortunately an at-need situation where somebody has already died, the first question I'm going to ask is, where do you own graves?
Yeah.
And if the answer is we don't have them yet, then unfortunately, before we can proceed with funeral arrangements, you're going to have to get graves somewhere. Now, excuse me.
Yeah.
um, it's not the easiest thing to have to do, and it will certainly add to the cost at the time, in addition to the funeral cost and the whatever costs the cemetery has. You're also going to incur the cost of the actual grave purchase. But more importantly, from my standpoint, in order for a funeral home to schedule a burial, we have to file a death certificate with the local authority, whether it's in New Jersey or New York. Part of filing a death certificate is filling in the name and location of the cemetery. If you can't answer that question, if you first have to go and buy graves, then until you conclude the purchase of the grave, whether it's through a cemetery directly or in the case of Temple Beth-El through us and me, I can't I can't file a death certificate. It's going to delay things.
Yeah,
And
that
not
holds up a lot of things, right?
I'm sorry?
That holds up quite a few things
It
that
does.
you have
It
to
does.
do. Yeah.
It holds up a lot. And even though we live in a mostly reform world, people still like to do things quickly when it comes to Jewish funerals. Very more often than not, there's no more than a day between the time of a death and the time of a burial, unless somebody has to travel or unless the death occurred out of state, which will naturally delay things. Uh, but if one does not own a grave, if one does not know the answer to my first question, which is where are we going, then we're going to have to figure that out. That's going to be number one. So my best suggestion is to always do a little advanced planning for yourself. You'll be much better off for it down the road, even if you don't make funeral plans in advance, which is also something that I suggest because it takes a lot of the stress off of you, off of the family. Um, I don't have to ask well, what's mom's social security number in the middle of the night when you call me at 2 a.m. I'm going to have a lot of questions unless I know them unless I have them in a file already.
Right.
But most importantly is is the location of the burial. And we are fortunate at Temple Beth-El in that we own our own little piece of cemetery.
Right.
Many synagogues do not, and the family is left to they're sort of put at the mercy of the cemetery salesman,
Mhm.
because no cemetery, I don't know of a cemetery in our area that's going to sell you a grave sight unseen. They're going to make you come in and they're going to give you the tour. All of this while your family member has just died
Yeah.
and you want to schedule a funeral. Now you're going and touring graves at a cemetery. Some cemeteries will put a hard sell on you because they have different prices for different locations and they're going to show you their best product first. Beth, can we stop for a second?
Okay, we're back. We took a little break there, and Larry was talking about, um, how it's better to beforehand pick a site for yourself and arrange for your burial if you can, for your own good and for your family members that you'll leave behind. So, if someone was interested in looking at some of these plot spaces, what should they do?
Very easy. They can get in touch with me. Uh, my my on my regular business line, which is actually it's in the Temple newsletter. There's also an email address in the Temple newsletter for me specifically as cemetery chairman. Um,
We'll find that out and get it in the newsletter, and I can put it at the end of the
right.
video. Yeah.
And I can certainly give someone directions to get, well, if you need directions, I can give them to get to Mount Moriah itself. Once inside the gates, our grounds are right on the main road. I can certainly talk anybody through finding them very easily. There are no turns. You drive in, and we are essentially we have a very nice piece of grounds at the end of the main road. And anybody who's ever been to Mount Moriah knows what I'm talking about when I say that it is very well run and well kept. And I can't stress enough that you'd be doing yourself a great service by at least doing that in advance. If you never wanted to speak about your own funeral arrangements in advance, I can understand. But purchasing graves and having them at the ready is really the key to a smoothly functioning funeral for yourself or your parent or whoever it may be. And you can buy Temple has you can buy one can buy a single grave, one can buy two graves for a husband and wife. We also have the ability, because it's a newer grounds, we have the ability to carve out, so to speak, a family plot of a square of 4 graves or a rectangle of 6 or 8, depending on what need you're trying to fill. And we can certainly arrange for graves at need, but again, I don't wish that on anybody.
Well, I'm just curious. Do the people that get buried there have to be Jewish? What if I have a wife that's not Jewish?
It's a very good question, because we, being a Reformed community, being a progressive congregation, the answer to your question is technically no. The only caveat is that no other religious symbols other than Jewish symbols can appear on a monument in a Jewish cemetery, any Jewish cemetery. So if someone were married to someone who was of another faith and they wanted to be buried together in a Jewish cemetery, it would have to be understood from the outset that the only religious symbolism on a monument could be Jewish.
Right.
If that and if not that, then there wouldn't be any religious symbolism.
Okay, well, that answers that. Thank you. All right. Well, I want to thank Larry for taking the time to talk with us today. I'm
Thank
Beth
you, Beth.
Achenbach. Oh, you're welcome. I enjoyed the little informative getting to know you.
Most people never have this discussion. Not until they have to.
Yeah. Well, a few months back, the rabbi and I did a talk on death, and it was really informative. And the reason why we wanted to do it is because a lot of people don't talk about it till it happens. And I've been through it a few times, and you need to talk about it. and you need to arrange, because when you leave people behind to take care of it, it's tough on them.
You're absolutely correct. And there are always going to be times when a death occurs that was sudden, unexpected, and tragic, and a family's not prepared for it. And in that case, I can understand not being ready, not having all the answers
Sure.
for someone in my position. But the stress can be avoided most of the time simply by purchasing graves. And Temple has, again, we have a beautiful tract of grounds, and I would speak to anybody who's interested about it.
Thank you. I'm gonna, when we sign off of here, I'm gonna talk to you about that. I want to take a look at those.
Okie dokie.
Well, thank you, Larry, and thank you everyone for taking a
Thank you,
watch.
Beth.
I'm Beth Achenbach, and this has been a member spotlight from Temple Beth-El of Jersey City. You can visit us anytime at www.betheljc.org. And if you want to check out Larry's website, it's www.guttermanbrothers.com.
Correct.
Take care.
Thank you, Beth.